Welcome to Mriyaslava. In the last episode, I was focused on the game, but I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the city I'm building and the idea behind it. Mriyaslava is a fictional European city located in some nondescript part of Europe. And in the last episode, I think we got ourselves set up pretty nicely. There's an old town area by the river with very irregular roads. It's currently filled with low-density residential homes, but we'll rezone this at a higher density down the line. This whole area is meant to become the core of our city, and it's where most of the development is currently focused. There's a temporary industrial area across the river that we'll relocate later this episode, and an agricultural district a little further down the highway. One of the first things I built in the last episode was this main road that I want to situate our central train station on, so let's do that now. So in City Skylines 1, for things like buses and trams, before you could actually make a line, you had to put down a depot for the vehicles to come out of. And in City Skylines 2, this has been extended to pretty much every single form of transit. So before I actually put down the station itself, I first have to put down a train depot. This is essentially like an entire rail yard, so the very first thing I'm doing here is actually making space for it, for where I want it. So there's this area near the sort of central area that I've been developing, and I just expanded outwards a little bit with the terraforming tools, which are free, even when you're playing normally and without infinite money. It doesn't cost anything to use terraforming tools, which I think is pretty cool because it gives you more incentive to use them and sort of shape the landscape to your needs. So I ended up taking a couple tries because I kept underestimating the size of this thing, but eventually I got it right. And the next thing I did was then actually put down the train station itself, obviously, and connect it up to the main line. I really like having these depots because it makes the railway feel more useful, like purposeful, and not just like this decorative item that's sitting in your city. You know, you actually have to think about the way the trains will be coming from the depot to your tracks. You need to make sure that it can serve every platform and every line that I have here, right? If I want a rail line coming out from that first platform closest to the road, I need to make sure that from the depot, the trains can actually reach there. And so you'll see me working on that a little bit later. Now, the first thing I did, as you can see here, is basically connect up this set of lead tracks that goes through the depot. It's basically, the only set of double tracks that's going through. And so I just wanted to make that our kind of like main set of tracks leaving the depot. And then it was on to actually connecting up all the different tracks that are going to our platforms. And I found a kind of sweet spot at 66 meters between these tracks. It's like a 14-degree angle. It's a little bit finicky to get it right, but that was the best angle I found, and no glitches or anything. And I figured I'd show this in full detail now because basically from now on and all the rail work I'm going to be doing, I'm just basically copying that and doing the same thing over and over. I will say though, I absolutely can't wait for somebody to make Move It 2 for this game, because getting some of this stuff done manually is just an absolute nightmare. You know how in City Skylines 1, when you use Move It and you were working with tracks, right, and you make it a little bit too shallow, the tracks start sort of warping and glitching out. They're no longer like parallel anymore and they start turning all over the place. That kind of, it still happens here if you go too shallow with the slope. And I like that vanilla, it still lets you get so shallow with the slope, but it does make it a little bit hard to find that sweet spot for getting the tracks to look nice and the angle to not be too strong. Once I had those lead tracks in, it was really just a matter of connecting up all these other yard tracks up to our lead tracks coming in and out of the yard. And that was pretty much it for the depot. But of course, we still needed a road connection, so that was the next thing I did. I really like how roads work with the train tracks now, because it doesn't really seem to care where on the tracks they are. You can just drag the road straight through the tracks and it'll create a perfect little crossing. Unless you're right next to like a big, switch with like a ton of tracks connecting up. But even then, I found in some cases it would be completely fine with that, and you could build a crossing right through a railroad switch, no problem. Something else I did while working in this area is build this road bridge that goes over the tracks. I just figured I'd get it out of the way now rather than leaving it for later, because it gives me sort of room to expand in the future and sort of think a little bit ahead of what I'm going to be doing. A core aspect of building a European-style city is the sort of organic development. So you don't want to plan too far ahead, but being aware of, the things you want to do in advance a little bit, it is definitely helpful. Just like how I knew I was going to build the train station here, so I left a blank area here, but I didn't develop it right away. And that's the thing, throughout this whole episode, while I'm working on this railroad stuff, I'm also going back and periodically expanding little bits of the city. Because like I said, that's a very core part of why European cities look the way they do, is because they have that natural growth and expansion that comes from the city growing as the population does. It's definitely very tempting to pre-plan all the roads in advance and everything, and you can get a very beautiful city that way. But that was just not the goal of what I was doing here. I wanted to, try something new that I haven't done before, and to me, this seemed like a good strategy. Now, obviously, the focus of this episode is the railroads, but I still do want to show some of the city building work that I did. So, you saw I built that park there, and I'm basically creating a space for just some kind of plaza area in front of the train station. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to fill it with yet, other than that park, but we'll see. It's room again for the future. I also found out that you can apply multiple upgrades to the same road. So you saw there I was doing the grass strips and the trees, so you can have them both, which is something that I didn't know you could do in the last episode, actually. What I really wish, though, is that you could give some of those upgrades to the pedestrian streets. The pedestrian streets are really nice. I like that they're included with the game, but it would be great if, they weren't just like concrete paths and actually had some like benches on them and trees or something. Now you can see on screen right now kind of why I was complaining so much about the zoning gaps in the last episode. Because what is this? This is so disorganized and inconsistent. You really don't get a lot of good looking zone buildings that way. And I think this is one of the reasons why people prefer to manually place their buildings in City Skylines 1, because these grids are just a nightmare and you can't really get a good looking city by just, pure zoning. But on the topic of zoning, this was a trick that I actually learned from some other City Skylines creators that I was watching, which is actually to avoid zoning the corners. And basically that lets you orient all the buildings correctly so that they're facing, the road that you want them to, instead of, being oriented randomly depending on, which road they decide to snap to at the corner. A lot of the zoning stuff that you're seeing me doing, which includes some of the work that I do in the agricultural area, is very temporary, and I expect it'll change at some point in the future. A lot of it I just kind of want to try out to see how it looks, how it works, because these are new features to me that I don't, exactly understand the functionality of. I'm also just trying to kind of get our city set up with a decent enough sized population so we have a good income and enough citizens that will use our services and transportation and things like that. Once that's in place, then I think we can go back and change things around and make things look a lot prettier than they are right now. One of the big things that I did need to do is create a new industrial area, because in the last episode, the area we built was just kind of as close as we could get to the city. We didn't have any new tiles yet. We didn't really have highways unlocked, so I couldn't build any new highway interchanges. But now that we have that stuff unlocked, I wanted to sort of free up that area that the industrial area is in right now for some other development down the line. So I knew where I wanted the new industrial area to be. It was just a matter of actually getting it connected up to the rest of the city. So I decided to build this little highway interchange here. It's pretty low capacity, and I'll probably have to change it in the future, but I kind of just wanted something small and compact so it wouldn't take up too much space. And man, I love working with the new highways. I mean, every time I build any kind of on or off ramp, I always end up zooming out and admiring my work, even though it wasn't me, it was the game. But yeah, having that lane-based system to get those smooth transitions is just so nice. I can't really understate that. I love that about this game. In City Skylines 1, it was almost like a skill, Like, oh yeah, I can build highway interchanges. But with the way roads work in City Skylines 2, it's almost trivial. Now, the big centerpiece of this industrial area is the freight terminal. It's what facilitates importing and exporting all our cargo. It's, to me, the most important thing. And I did build some sort of temporary roads around this area, but again, like I said, it's just temporary. I didn't want to deal with zoning all the industrial and getting that whole area looking nice. I just kind of wanted to shove all the industry that I had in the existing area over to here and then worry about it later. I think maybe in the next episode we'll actually get this area situated properly with like a port and everything. But for now, yeah, I just kind of wanted to get our main buildings in place. So a couple people were confused about this in the last episode, but yes, we have basically a maximum milestone that we're allowed to reach per episode that Paradox has given us. In this case, I think it was Big Town or something, but I really kind of wanted to relax. It took a lot of work in the last episode to get to the maximum milestone. And I ended up having to pull an all-nighter, and it was just this whole ordeal. So I kind of just wanted to focus on smaller, more attainable goals in each episode. Kind of cuts down the pressure, and it also lets me focus on that thing entirely instead of flying around the city and working on a dozen different things. The most frequent comment that I got in my last video was that the game looks bad and it looks like shit. It's been in development for 8 years. It should look better than this, which I can't help but feel is coming from a fallacious point of view. For a city builder like this, that's just not the point. I don't think you need 16K resolution, parallax, ultra realistic textures. And for what it's worth, from my experience playing, I think it's a very big step up from what we had in City Skylines 1. I think that Colossal Order absolutely nailed things like the weather and how the atmosphere looks. I love the clouds and just how, depending on the weather and the type of clouds, the light changes. It feels like the people crying about how bad the game looks are expecting the game to have like every single mod that we had for City Skylines 1, which I don't think is a reasonable assumption. If you want ultra realism, you can absolutely rest assured that assets and mods that are like super highly detailed vehicles and buildings will be like one of the first things that comes out for the game. If you have a computer with a RTX 4090 and you can run that, go ahead, good for you. But people have to remember that when making a game like this, you still have to leave it accessible for a large audience, and not everyone has a computer that powerful. Designing it to be that graphically intensive would be so prohibitive for so many people. And again, I'm not a spokesperson for Paradox or Colossal or anything. These are my opinions. And I'm not saying the game is perfect either, but I feel like people are creating way too unreasonable expectations for this game. And I think part of that is just because they're underestimating how much of an improvement what we're getting is over City Skylines 1. And I think a lot of that will change once people actually get their hands on the game and get a chance to play. But anyways, that's my opinion on that issue. I do want to talk about what I'm doing on screen right now, because it ended up being kind of the core project of this episode, which is this big rail junction. This junction is essentially a product of everything there is to connect up in this area. The passenger train station, the freight terminal, the main line going in both directions. But it's funny how it came about, because it happened very naturally. I had the junction set up one way, and then I realized, this line can't connect to that station because of this, so I had to rebuild it, and it ended up kind of evolving over time into what it is now. I tried to use a tunnel once instead of this flyover, and I realized that was kind of a dumb idea, and I'm really happy with how this ended up looking. I think that having the infrastructure above ground as much as possible really gives it a lot more character than hiding it all underground. And then the last thing I really did after that was just build this final freight line between the freight terminal I have in the agricultural area and the freight terminal in this industrial area here, just to transfer cargo between the two. But anyways, that's about it for this episode. I don't know if you could tell from my voice, but I'm enjoying myself, which is a good thing. It's just been so much fun to build a new city and play around with all these new tools, and I can't thank Paradox enough for giving me early access to the game and letting me experience it. Thanks everyone so much for watching. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, feel free to leave them down below, and I'll see you next time.